Today, we're going to review the causes of the Great Depression. As we go through the PowerPoint slide, please note that I have gone through and anything that you can find in the vocabulary section of your worksheet is in red, and anything that is referring to dates and events on your worksheet is in blue. You're welcome. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is overproduction of goods. So we've talked about this before. Americans love stuff. So, of course, we're going to be increasing the amount of stuff we're making after the Industrial Revolution and World War I. So, many industries began to struggle in the 1920s. Railroad, steel, textile, coal, and lumber profits definitely dropped. Even the big businesses, like we talked about Ford, Goodyear, they're struggling as well. The housing industry began to slow down. So we saw all the tenements and the suburbs being built around the beginning of the 1900s before World War I, and now we're starting to see a slow in that development. Of course, all the people filling these jobs is also going to decrease if the companies don't have the money to pay them. Some industries, however, continue to produce, leaving unused goods, which we call surplus. So this is extra stuff that people just aren't buying. Here are some examples of what those look like. These are some major industries. Pennsylvania, we have the steel mills. Remember Carnegie and his steel. We have coal mines, which was a major industry in the Northeast, places like Virginia, North Carolina, and then sawmills, so all that untamed frontier where we're using wood for buildings and homes. All right, also, we have an agricultural crisis. So during World War I, the demand for crops soared, prices increased, which means farmers were making good money. However, after World War I, we start running into problems. So farmers started planting more crops, so they had to take out loans for their supplies and equipment because there was a demand. Once that demand is gone, that's where we're going to see a problem in the 1920s. So once World War I was over, we start seeing people having a surplus of crops. So demand drops 40%. Farmers who had been increasing production, the surplus was created and prices fall even more. Farmers could not pay back their debts to the banks. Banks would foreclose or take the property and the homes that these people lived in to settle the debt that they were owed on the loans. Even small banks in rural areas, which you guys will remember is out in the country outside of the city, they started to fail as well. Congress tried to help, however, at such a magnitude and all of the other problems that are occurring at this time, there was only so much they could do. All right, uneven distribution of income. So uneven means that it is not fair, it is not equal, and that's what we're going to see an increase of during the 1920s. So things were going great when we were talking about that booming period where you have, sports races, sporting events, concerts, movies, all those really cool things that we learned about last week and the week before. There was an increase. People had extra money. However, as we move out of the 1920s into the 1930s, we start seeing problems. So the wealthiest people began getting wealthier, okay, while the people that were poor continued to get poorer. So what was happening is people were working jobs, they were getting paychecks. However, the cost of goods and the cost of living was increasing, and the pay of those lower level workers was not increasing. So that affects our standard of living. Your standard of living is what an average family needs to make in that area for education, for their bills, their food, and the overall well-being of those individuals. So Obviously, different places have a different standard of living, but back then, the standard of living, the average was 2,500 a year. Can you imagine now? 2,500 is maybe half of what most families need to survive in a month. All right, many struggled to buy the necessities that they needed. And when I say necessities, I'm not talking about cell phones and internet. I'm talking about food, maybe coal or oil to heat their homes in the north, milk, basic food for children, medicine. Those are the necessities we're talking about, not iPhones, Beats headphones, Xbox, the things that you might think is necessary today. Most Americans did not have electricity at this point, which when you think about the amount of industry and growth we had from the 1900s to the 1920s, you would think more people had electricity, but most still were using coal. So the coal industry was barely hanging on due to the fact that most Americans not yet have got electricity. All right, consumer debt. So consumers are the people who buy goods or services, and debt is money that you owe to somebody. So many Americans were purchasing new goods, and banks were making credit available. So this is the first time we're going to see formal lines of credit through banks and not through underground groups. Like I said, consumers are the people who buy products or goods, and they did not have the cash to buy these things. Americans started to want more things. We see the increase of appliances. We talked about men's suits, women's dress. They're starting to buy things that they don't necessarily need for survival. So they're borrowing money, and anytime you borrow money, you have to pay back with interest. Okay, these are fees for borrowing and taking someone else's money with the promise to pay it back. Ooh, yes, a shiny new car. That would be something that people would put on credit. All right, so we have all these people who are putting things on credit. However, job losses and lower wages is not going to help with this repayment. Workers' wages or pay remained stagnant or even decreased during this time going into the 1930s. Prices of goods and services increased, like I mentioned a couple slides ago. Americans did not have the extra money to spend, and many struggled to pay back that debt that they owed. Guys, this is something that is very reflective of our current situation and pandemic. People who had jobs maybe got cut or do not have jobs anymore, but they still have money that they owe to people for their car, their house, credit cards. And this is a situation that happened in 1920s. Here we are 100 years later, and we are seeing a similar trend due to unforeseen circumstances. Businesses were left with a surplus of goods that they couldn't sell, so they had manufactured products, but there weren't people to buy them. This is not a good situation. Hopefully, we are not going to see such a loss as during this time as we come hopefully nearer this pandemic. But at this time, this was really bad for the economy. All of these things were creating layers of problems, which is what's going to lead to our Great Depression. Okay, workers were laid off. They saw less hours, which meant less pay. People were living in shacks, multiple people in one-room apartments. They would make their own, like homeless towns, basically. All right, what a great time for an election. Good luck. You're the president as the economy is falling in 1928. So people were trying to be optimistic. We have Republican Herbert Hoover against Democrat Alfred Smith. Hoover had less experience, however, he was the Secretary of Commerce, so people believed that maybe he could pull this out. Maybe he could get America back into an upswing of the economy, back into that boom period. Hoover gained the votes and he won. He promised to keep the country strong. All right, so let's add another layer to what's going on right now heading into the 30s, the stock market. So things were going really, really well. The prices began to rise steadily. People were investing in the stock market. And what a stock is that it's just share or ownership in a company. So you could buy stock in Google. You could be a part owner of Google. All right, by 1923, 3% of Americans own shares of stock, so that's a relatively low number. Most were already wealthy, um, but there were still some others that were everyday people that were just hoping to hit that big winning company, the get rich and have all of this time and effort pay off. Many people, however, bought stock on speculation, which means they didn't have any concrete data or information that this company was going to do really well. Some borrowed money to buy stock, so they are taking out credit to buy stocks, hoping the company will increase in value and not decrease in value. Doesn't sound like a very good idea to me. The government did not regulate the stock market at this time. The stock market continued to climb and climb, but it was not all a reality. It was going up, people were putting money into it. However, these companies were not getting wealthy at this time, and that's what we're going to see is the problem. So, and that's part of what leads to the stock market crash. So, companies are appearing to be worth more money than they are. And if you're a company that is selling goods and your goods are sitting in a factory, obviously you're not going to be making money. September 1929, stock prices fell and some investors sold. Okay, so those are probably more of your wealthy investors. Those are not your average Joes. Most people, the common man, was going to try to ride it out for the big payoff. October 24th, the stock market dropped a little bit more and more shares sold, which made the price drop even more. And then the actual thing that caused the stock market crash and signaled the Great Depression was on October 29th, 1929. The stock market crashes due to failing value. This is the pivoting point. Okay, so all these other things are adding layers. This is the main event that is going to cause the Great Depression. Okay, the bottom photo here, you're going to see this is a crowd that's going to form outside the New York Stock Exchange. Things got very violent. People's money was gone. There was a lot of uncertainty of what would happen next, which added to the problems. All right, so October 29th, 1929 is known as Black Tuesday. Okay, this is where things went horribly wrong. People didn't have access to their money. The money invested in these companies was not there, causing even more problems. All right, so people who bought stock on credit, they were left with high debt and worthless shares in a company. So basically, you paid your money for a piece of paper. And if you are only making $1,000 a year. Remember, we talked about the standard of living was $1,250. If you're only making $1,000 a year and you invested a little bit into this stock, that's a huge hit for your family and their survival. By the following month, so in November, investors had lost $30 billion. That is a lot of money back then, guys. $30 billion is a lot of money today. So imagine how much that was back then. Literally everything your family had is gone. All right. So obviously people are not happy. Okay, only 90% of Americans had money in the stock market, but everybody felt the consequences because now that debt that people owe is not being paid. These companies are not able to pay their workers. They're not able to pay their loans to the bank, which is creating a snowball of problems. So people panicked. This is my money. I want my money. I'm going to go get my money out of the bank. And they could not get their money out of the bank. Fun fact, banks don't keep all the money in one location. That'd be kind of silly, right? So here, let's say you have 200 people who have $10,000 in the bank, okay? They do not have that much money sitting in the vault to be withdrawn that day. So this creates more problems, more chaos. Everyday people are freaking out who didn't have anything to do with the stock market. They just want their money. And this creates a huge problem. 11,000 banks fail. Okay? People lost all their money. Can you imagine going to the bank and you think you have $5,000 and the bank goes, sorry, we don't have that, and they close the next day and your money is gone forever? $5,000, okay? That might not seem like a lot of money to some of these celebrities, but to everyday people, that's a lot of money. And that's what happened. So there was rioting, there were people going crazy in the streets because they're not sure how they're going to survive. Now we have federal protections on that. All of your money is insured through the FDIC. So the federal government now has protections on our money to try to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. So while it was quite tragic and horrible for these people at the time, it has created safeguards for us today. Many people, like, their money is gone. They have no way to feed their family. Companies are closing. We see an increase in soup kitchens and bread lines. 90,000 businesses went bankrupt, which obviously is not good. The gross domestic product, or GDP, is the total value of US goods and services that we produce in a year. So that dropped. We also have unemployment increasing. So unemployment increased 20%. And like I said, soup kitchens and bread lines become more common. Before this time period, as we learned in the early 1900s, there were some agencies set up to help the poor or immigrants coming from other countries living in the ghettos. But now this is everyday people who are having to go to bread lines and soup kitchens to help provide for their families. All right, so it wasn't just in America that this depression happened, right? It was a global. We are all connected, especially at this time. You have other major manufacturers in the world that we buy and sell goods with. So America wasn't able to send the goods like they normally would, and we weren't able to buy the goods from the other countries. Of course, this is going to create problems in those countries as well. So it was kind of like a ripple effect around the world. Once the stock market of the United States crashed, it created problems for other Western countries. In 1930, we see the passage of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It raised taxes on imports, trying to get Americans to buy more American goods. Seems like a good idea, but probably not good for international relations. And people weren't able to pay for American goods because the cost of those goods also increased. All right, unemployment increased around the world, and many countries raised their tariffs, which is just compacting the problem and making it worse for everyone. Overall, world trade decreased by 40% by 1933. So we are talking about 3 years after the stock market crash, we have a decrease of 40% in global trade. All right, guys. So hopefully that helps you understand. One thing you could do is you could run through this again and have me talk, and you could go through the vocabulary or the key dates and events. I have gone through and highlighted everything for you. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will catch you on the flip side.